Okay, so for the last video in today's lecture, what I'd like us to do is think a little bit about how the effects of Hauksbee and Turner's intervention of encouraging high-achieving low-income students to apply to more selective colleges than they would otherwise is likely to affect through social channels both what we might think of as the home communities of these students, that is the other students who attend their high schools or the other students who live in their neighborhoods, and the destination communities of these students. In other words, the other students who attend the elite colleges and universities that they're encouraged to attend. The reason I want to do this is twofold. So first of all, I want to say that Hauksbee and Turner make a very strong argument for essentially the benefits of their intervention in terms of justice and equity from the perspective of the students that they're interacting with. In other words, if we believe in an egalitarian and meritocratic society, we should not be okay with the idea that some students of high ability are not able to get the opportunities that other students of high ability get because of the fact that they lack the information and social networks necessary to navigate the college application process. If we want to think more broadly, though, about how this is likely to transform equity and justice across communities, in other words, if we want to think about, is this going to have spillover benefits to the other students who live in low-income communities who maybe don't have the very, very high ability of the students affected by this intervention? Or will it have spillover costs on those students? Will this have spillover benefits on the other students who will attend elite colleges by increasing the diversity of their experiences? Or will it have spillover costs on those students? And this is both a useful way for us to think using the models we've been developing to think about the economics of societies and economics of communities. It's also going to be, I think, an important part of trying to evaluate this approach to addressing inequality, because really much more than the benefits and costs, or much more than the costs of the $6 pamphlets that Hauksbee and Turner sent out, the much more important component of this program that's much harder to think about is the potential benefits and costs socially. So in order to do this, I'm going to just spend a couple minutes on kind of two questions. So first, the benefits and costs from social channels for what I'm going to call home communities, which is to say the high school that students attended, the neighborhood, community, metropolitan area that students lived in, and then the potential benefits and costs through social channels to the destination community, which is to say the elite colleges and universities. So let's start by thinking about the potential social benefits to other members of a student's hometown community of that student attending a more elite or a more selective college than they would otherwise. So let's start by thinking about this with our social distance model. So as you might remember, what we said is that we're going to think about social distance as being a function both of your starting level of human capital and your ending level of human capital. So we can think of this as something like your parents' socioeconomic status plus the selectivity of college that you choose to attend. And we'll say that the social distance between two people, or the return to the relationship between two people, say person A and person B, is going to be something like this, right? So it'll be some S of AB is going to equal some maximum benefit, let's say 100, divided by the distance in their childhood times their distance in adulthood, right? So the distance in their childhood, right? And we add this 1 here so that the benefit doesn't go to infinity, and then times the distance in adulthood. So let's imagine that person A and person B grow up in the same low-income community. So they have H0A equal to H0B equal to 1. And let's say there's some person C who grows up with higher socioeconomic status. So we'll say H0C equals 10. Now, if person A is a recipient of one of Hauksbee and Turner's packets and decides to go to an elite university, that'll lead to H0A also equaling 10. Or sorry, H1A also equaling 10. And maybe person C was going to go to that elite university anyway. So H1C will also equal 10. So what I want to show is that the social return for person B of having person A at the elite university is going to be higher than having person C at the elite university. In other words, that having another member of your home community attending an elite college makes the social return for you of attending that elite college higher. In other words, it makes it easier or more beneficial or more fruitful for you to also go and attend that elite college, right? So if we think about the social value AB, we'll say S of AB is going to equal 100 divided by 1 plus 0, right? Times 1 plus 0 is 100. Whereas the social distance between person B and person C is not going to be quite as large because of the fact that they have different initial backgrounds, right? So right, so essentially what our social distance model is going to tell us is that the social return for attending the elite college, right, for choosing an H1B equal to 10 is going to be higher if someone from your community is attending that college than if someone from a higher initial socioeconomic status from you is attending that college. In normal terms or real terms, we could think of this as the people being affected directly by Hauksbee and Turner's intervention, serving as role models or pathfinders or something like this for other members of their communities. In other words, they're going to be able to help other people in their home communities navigate the process themselves, give them an ally when they arrive on campus, make it easier for them to imagine themselves attending an elite university. And so this is going to be a story that tells us that there's going to be this positive spillover benefit to other people who attended the treated students' high schools or members of the treated students' communities. We could also think about this in our identity model. If we thought that there's some identity of elite student, right, or member of the elite or intellectual or something like this, that has some initial prescription that, you know, people who go to Harvard are supposed to be rich or supposed to be white or are supposed to have highly educated parents or be from urban areas, that each student who violates those prescriptions, who attends Harvard and does well, weakens the strength of those prescriptions. In other words, reduces the identity cost of other students who are non-urban or have less educated parents or come from lower income backgrounds also choosing to attend Harvard. Okay, so both of these stories, right, are going to tell us that there's this positive social benefit on other members of the home community from having somebody in your home community helped into attending an elite college or university, right? And if we thought about this in normal terms rather than in model terms, we would say that these treated students are going to act as role models and help make the peer group and the community at elite colleges more supportive for other low-income students. And so just to give a little bit of evidence that this sort of thing can happen, a researcher named Andrew Dustin decided to take a look at the effect of having a sibling who attends an elite high school in Mexico on their younger siblings' likelihoods of attending those elite high schools. The way that he was able to do this is that in Mexico, at least in Mexico City, the way that high school attendance is determined is everybody takes a standardized test and ranks their high school preferences from first to last, and then is allowed to attend their highest ranked high school for which their score is above a cutoff. So he basically says, let's compare older siblings whose scores were just above the cutoff for their favorite high school to siblings whose scores were just below that favorite cutoff, and see how that affects their younger siblings' likelihood of ranking that high school highly. And essentially what he sees, what you can see in this table, if we look at this here, is that your likelihood of ranking a high school as your first choice or as any of your top choices is higher if your older brother or sister just got into the high school versus if they just didn't get into the high school, which Dustin interprets as essentially evidence for exactly this sort of story, right? You've got an older sibling who attended the school, so you have more information, you can more easily picture yourself there. They act as this sort of role model or supportive peer group for attendance to that high school. And so, of course, siblings are closer than other members of communities, but we can imagine this same sort of spillover happening for other people who attend your schools. Okay, so helping high-achieving low-income students attend more selective colleges might help their peers in their high school or in their home community by providing role models and providing guidance and other positive spillovers for students who want to also attend selective colleges, right? So we might expect that helping one high-achieving low-income student attend a selective college is going to in turn help other similar students from their community attend that same selective college or other selective colleges. But is there another story in which helping a high-achieving low-income student attend a more selective college could potentially hurt other members of their hometown community? And to think about this, I want us to remember that the Hoxby and Turner intervention targeted very high-achieving students. So most of the students that were receiving these packets were the most academically prepared student in their home high school. So as a result, let's think again about a situation where we've got two students who have the same family background, right? The same initial level of socioeconomic status. So we'll say H0A equals H0B equals 1. But now what we're going to say is that person A is more academically prepared than person B, right? So person A is going to choose a college that is better than or equal to the college that person B chose. Person B might decide to match person A's college, but they're not going to exceed person A's college. So in this case, we can simplify this social distance function to the following. Right, so their social distance in childhood, right, their family socioeconomic status difference is 0. And we know that their social distance in adulthood, right, the colleges that they choose, is going to be H1A minus H1B because we know that H1A is at least as big as H1B. So now let's think about how the social return of an additional bit of education is going to be affected by H1B. So if we're person B and we're deciding which college to go to, right, we might want to think about how much could I increase or decrease my social distance, right, increase my social return, my relationship with person A, by increasing the quality of school that I go to. So I want to take the derivative of S with respect to H1B. Right, and this is going to be using the chain rule. We can say right, 1 over something, but then we're going to take the derivative of this with respect to H1B, so that's actually going to become a positive. Right, so what this is going to mean is that increasing my H1B is going to increase my social return, and the amount that it's going to increase is going to be given by this, 100 over 1 plus H1A minus H1B squared. So what this means is, let's say that H1A equals 10 again. Right? We can think about what's my social return going to be of increasing H1B a little bit from various starting points. So if H1B was 1, the social return would be 100 over 11 minus 1 squared, right, equals 100 over 100 equals 1. Right? If instead H1B was 9, right, then the social return of increasing H1B a little bit would increase to 25, right? And if H1B was 10, at the very highest level, or just below 10, it would be 100 over 1 squared would be 100. So if we graph this, right, what we're going to get is a social return like this, right? It increases dramatically up until it hits, not actually going to be an asymptote here, right? It's going to hit a maximum at 100. So what's this telling us? What's the point of this? What this is telling us is that you're going to be much more influential to your friend by trying to induce them to increase their quality of education just a little bit to match you, than you are trying to get them to increase their quality of education a lot, right? The pull of your friend is going to be much smaller if your personal return is to choose H1B of 1, than if your personal return was to choose an H1B of 9. And so what this might mean, what this might indicate in the real world, is that if we help the most high achieving students at a high school go to a really, really fabulous college that's out of reach for all of their friends, what that might do is instead of causing them to be a role model, it might effectively remove them from the social fabric of their high school, right? Essentially, they're going to be an unattainable example rather than an inspiring example. And so what we might actually see is that instead of creating social influence towards high achievement, we're going to remove social influence towards moderate achievement. Now, I want to be careful with this argument because, as we said from the beginning, it's deeply unethical to say, high achieving students from low income communities have an obligation to temper their expectations to not achieve at a high level in order to help other members of their communities. But at the same time, this is something that we might want to be aware of. If we're trying to think about to what degree should we focus resources on helping the most able of a low-income community versus trying to help kind of the medium student in a low-income community, there are these social returns to think about, and the story with these social returns is a little bit unclear. Okay, so as with the first story, we can again find a little bit of evidence for this story, and again by looking at siblings. So much like in Mexico, in Peru, a set of elite boarding schools have a high school admissions criteria that's again based entirely on a test score. And so what we can see is, if we take very, very highly capable students, right, the star students who are potentially able to get into one of these elite boarding schools, we want to see how does it affect your sibling if you just barely make it into one of these schools versus if you just barely miss out on one of these schools. And what we can see is, if you just barely make it into one of these schools, so your score just passes this red line here, your sibling's GPA drops compared to where it is if you just barely miss out on the schools. And the argument for this is essentially that, when you go to an elite boarding school, you leave your family, right? You leave your home community. As a result, you might not be able to help your sibling with homework. You might not be available to guide your sibling or give your sibling advice. In the US, we might want to think about this by looking at where graduates of the top universities in the country end up starting their careers. And what we see is that the vast majority of top graduates end up moving to a small number of cities, move to New York, Boston, DC, San Francisco, and then to a smaller extent, move to a handful of other, or remain in the areas that their elite colleges are based in. So what we might worry about here is that if we get the most capable students from Cleveland and Akron and Dayton to attend Princeton, Dartmouth, Yale, Harvard, what we might end up doing is pulling the most talented people out of the Cleveland, Akron, Dayton labor markets, right? The kind of people who might have had potential large social benefits to those home communities. So again, this is a little bit of a complicated and difficult argument. I don't know what to make of it morally, but when we're assessing the costs and benefits of this sort of program, it's something we want to think about. And think about with the knowledge that the empirical basis here is extremely, extremely flimsy. Okay, so far we've talked about the costs and benefits for high-achieving low-income students' home community, right? The other students that attended their high school or grew up in their neighborhoods. Let's think about the benefits or costs for students attending the elite colleges that they are being helped into, right? In other words, if we want to think about how does getting a high-achieving low-income student into Harvard affect other students at Harvard? And the main way I want to think about this is through this identity model. So we might want to ask the question, does having more high-achieving low-income students at Harvard affect the sort of identity formation that goes on at Harvard? Does it affect the way that Harvard students view the prescriptions around the identity Harvard student? What we might hope is that having more examples of high-achieving low-income students would reduce the degree to which Harvard students or elite graduates or high IQ individuals or whatever you want to say are perceived by others as needing to be rich or needing to be urban or needing to be white. And in fact, what we can see, we've got a little bit of evidence for this, by looking at the way that being assigned to a roommate who differs from you on various characteristics affects your perceptions of diversity. So one famous paper that looked at this compared white students who attended a flagship state university who were randomly assigned to either have a white or black roommate and saw how this affected their perceptions of race. And so what you can see here is that if you are randomly assigned to have a black roommate, you're much more likely to have a positive view of affirmative action than if you were randomly assigned to a white roommate. And they find similar findings if they look at other measures, such as your expressed, if they ask you how comfortable you are interacting with people of other races or other cultures. If you were assigned a black roommate, your likelihood of saying that you're comfortable increases. Your likelihood of saying that you regularly do interact with people who are of different races of culture or cultures than you also increases. And there's growing evidence across a large variety of dimensions that use similar strategies. So for example, there's a paper using Indian universities that finds that when wealthy Indian students are randomly assigned to roommates from poor backgrounds, their empathy for poor people, their willingness to work with poor people, and their willingness to hire poor people all increase. So this is some evidence that, at least from the perspective of these elite social networks, we are likely to see that increasing the diversity of these elite social networks reduces the degree to which the identity formation that happens at elite universities excludes people of lower socioeconomic status. Okay, so that's all I want to say for today's lecture. I really look forward to hearing all of your thoughts about this paper and some of this other stuff I've thrown at you. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon. I can figure out how to shoot.